Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of our podcast, All Things Culture, a place where we discuss films, shows, articles, and all things culture. I'm your host, Somil.
And I'm your host, Ashra.
Today, we'll be talking about the Indian true crime Netflix docuseries House of Secrets and the events that are explored in the docuseries.
To give you a background, the series explores the apparent ritualistic suicides of 11 family members that took place on the night of July 1st, 2018, in the Burari constituency of New Delhi. 10 of the family members were found hanging, while the oldest member, the grandmother, was found strangled. The subsequent police investigation and the findings of the diaries at the crime scene revealed that the 45-year-old family member Lalit was instrumental in the events that transpired that night. What was so shocking about this case was that there were no signs nor any motive by the family that something like this could happen to them in the future. By all accounts, this family in Burari was happy and content.
For our listeners, note that this episode will be filled with spoilers from the docuseries, going quite in depth about the various aspects of the case while also relating them with the themes of cults, domestic abuse, and norms of Indian society.
And one final word before we proceed. Since the case involves real people and real lives, we feel it's extremely important to approach this case sensitively in a manner that does not sensationalize it, something that we were careful and mindful about while recording this conversation.
Now, without further ado, here's our conversation about the Burari case.
All things
That's just a real tragedy.
You know what's interesting, and one word which my co-host has brought up frequently is cult. And I think even in the documentary they don't really speak in those terms, but there is something about it which is very cult-like. The fact that there's one person who is at the top, you could say, who's giving the instructions of what they should do. And what the documentary also goes into is actually the reason why they might have followed all those instructions and stayed mum about it, not spoken to anybody else about it outside the family, is that they were actually doing well, listening to
Yeah.
those instructions. Like their business was going great. Everyone got educated in the family, and had good job positions, and one of them was just going to get married.
Yeah.
And she had an engagement, in fact, that week itself. And the curious thing is no one knew what was happening. So it is kind of like a cult in that sense, right? Even though it is a family, it's kind of like a cult situation where one person is telling what you ought to do, and there are people who staunchly believe it. At least that's what we presume. Of course, there's a great mystery in that no one really knows what they were going through. What makes me think though that it's so much of a cult is there was a video footage in the documentary itself of them a night before, carrying all the necessary items such as a stool which would be required, and all of them seemed calm. Like there was one footage where you could see the 13-year-old kid and I think the mother, they were carrying the stools and they didn't seem frazzled or forced. They were just going about it normally. In fact, to me, I'd read a theory somewhere that this may have not been a first attempt. Of course, this is not proven, and there's no evidence of it. It's just someone who has, I read someone say on the internet, that this might not have been their first attempt at doing something like, because they seem so calm in that, in that footage,
So you presume that there would be a possibility where they have performed this ritual before?
I don't know, but to me it is striking that they were so calm about this whole thing. Of the little footage we have of them, they were very calm about it.
And yeah, I mean, it really tells you a lot about how simple bias could actually, lead to so much of misinterpretation. And I think most cults around the world, like, I don't know what identifies as a cult, but a lot of these cults would, how they're formed. Like it's not just that they're doing a ritual. Like it would seem strange to a third person to think, why is someone doing a ritual like this when it's not benefiting them? But so as you mentioned, like they were doing well as a family, right? So suppose a cult leader tells them to do something and they get an immediate benefit out of it.
In
And
this case, their business was doing really well. They really took off in those 11 years financially.
yeah, and once that happens, you are bound to then keep following the leader and keep following the leader until the point where you don't even question the leader.
Yeah.
That's why like a lot of these cults like even it brings me to the guy Once Upon a Time in Hollywood guy.
Charles Manson,
Yeah,
right?
Charles Manson. So he had a bunch of hippies, and like when the hippies accepted him as the leader, they had a roof to live under. They had better food. They had
Right.
better people, at least people around them who they could connect to. So just that would just the fact that they had a better house, they had better privileges, would lead would lead them to keep following Charles Manson. It's a simple reward system, or simple conditioning as they call it in psychology.
Yeah, and there's another component to it. Just to stick to Manson for a moment, like for there's a component to cults where there is also larger mythos, which there's a belief system which everyone in that cult believes, and almost all of it involves something ultimate good which would come, if they would follow this. So in case of Manson said, listening to Beatles' White Album, that there are some secret messages about a holy war which would come about, and which they would partake in as the good guys, waging the war against the bad guys. So there is these narratives, and I can't help but also connect that component to our case here in House of Secrets, where they believed that this last ritual, they didn't believe that they are going to die. In fact, they believed that they would, the grandfather who's speaking through, as said by Lalit, is speaking through him, would ultimately come and save all of them. So it's ultimately a narrative about hope, right? In a way which is very characteristic of cults.
Yeah, I mean, all of that actually is very fascinating because, so to all our viewers, I am a psychology graduate, so I hold a key interest, like it's a key interest for me, psychology. And what you're talking about basically seems like this terminology that we use, it's called destructive obedience. So, I'll just tell you guys about the Stanley Milgram experiment, So basically, Stanley Milgram dressed up as a lab professor. So he put on a white coat, he put on, like he had papers, he had a goggle, all of that. And he told people that, like, there was a student and there was a teacher. Obviously, the student was the actor. The student was tied up on an electrical chair, and the participant was told that whenever the student gives a wrong answer, you have to give him a shock. And the shock started off at a very low voltage and increased to potentially life risking levels of electricity. So basically it is a whole full-fledged experiment, but I'll get to the crux of it, which was that when Stanley Milgram got in the participants who were to give the shocks, the participants were more likely to give the shocks when he wore that lab coat, when he wore that goggle, like the mythos that you're talking about. So something as simple as a lab coat would influence the participants to give potential like high levels of shocks. Now obviously the shocks were fake and all of this was an act, but you could see how simple mannerisms, simple dressing sense would influence a person's ability to make a decision. And all rationality gets lost when that mythos is present.
Yeah, this is a very interesting point. Like what you bring out here is that there's a larger narrative, there's a larger mythos which governs a cult. In this case, what do you call it? Cult family. That's the interesting question. But what also governs it is the role, of the leader. In every cult there's a leader. So in that experiment, the Milgram experiment, the role is of a doctor, right? When you're wearing a lab coat, you're a scientist or a doctor.
Yeah.
So that gives a sense of authority. And I think even in the House of Secrets documentary, in that case, there is an authoritative figure's voice, which is the grandfather's voice being spoken through Lalit, right? And the interesting thing is Lalit is not the eldest child of the family. He's the younger one. So you wouldn't think he would be the one holding the authority, right? But he is speaking through the grandfather who was the patriarch of the family who just passed away. So in a way he's donning a coat, a role which gives him the authority to build this mythos. Of course, none of this may be conscious, it's over time it comes about. But I think what's to note is that in all of these similar situations, there is someone who holds the authority and who is driving the narrative.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Also, like other aspects which were fascinating were, that like in Indian families, usually it is a norm that something should stay within the family, right? And like this show really talks about how that culture, if taken to a wild extreme, could lead to something that is so explosive, right? Like, so even in this show, it started off at a very minuscule level. There were no rituals or anything in this start. It was just that
the immediate effect, what it appeared to people, right?
Yeah, like now if say any member of the family would have gone and spoken about it to someone who's not a part of the family, who isn't always constantly a part of the family dynamics, and that would have led to some sort of insight, some sort of realization that
Some sort of questioning.
yeah, some sort of questioning. But once you are a part of the family of a cult or whatever, that decision making gets really difficult.
Yeah.
And also the fact that it went on for 11 years. So it was not overnight. It wasn't like today, the father's spirit came into Lalit and then the next day they did the ritual. It came like the first occurrence was in 2008, right?
I think, yeah.
Or 11, something of that sort.
So it's 11 years, and it's 2018. So I think it must be 2007.
Yeah.
Something around that time.
So, and like it's basic human tendency, right? For 11 years, you are a part of something. You in the beginning, you may not be very strongly in favor of what's going on, but once you have done that particular act, once you've partaken in,
once there are positive reinforcements.
yeah, once there are positive reinforcements, once you have done minor rituals like they did a yagna or whatever, for a period of 11 years, then it gets very difficult to just one day wake up and say, okay, no, this is not right, even when it's potentially life threatening.
Yeah.
Which in a lot of ways you can relate it with something like domestic abuse, right? Where you are in a marriage, right? And it may not be a happy marriage, and it would begin off with a minor incident, like a minor physical incident where someone slaps somebody or something of that sort, and you might like brush it aside, and you would keep brushing it aside for over a period of 11 years. And once you are in a situation, once you're in a marriage where, say, like traditionally the husband is like really assaulting the wife to the extent that the wife's life is in danger, the wife would still not leave the husband simply because she's been married to the man for a certain number of years.
Yeah.
That's what makes it difficult for her to leave.
Yeah.
There may not even be any benefits of staying with that man. In fact, it is a threat to her life, and there can be no bigger negative reinforcement than your own death, right? But simply because so many years have gone into it, and so many other people are also associated with it. Like in a marriage, you would say two families are, in communication. So that's what makes it difficult then to like abandon the marriage, and in this case to abandon the cult and just go away and say I'm not going to do this,
Yeah.
even when it's something like hanging yourself. And there were people in the family who were highly educated, who had a master's level of education, who were
I think
in
the
a
wife of Lalit had a degree in
Sociology,
sociology,
yeah.
which is, I mean, it's crazy, You would think that. So I have an undergraduate degree in sociology, and to me that stuck out so much because so many of the theories which we go through, even on that level, in a bachelor's level, directly speak to this. So I mean, it made me think: what does it speak to? The quality of education, or they were so deep into all of this that they couldn't see past it?
Yeah, most family members, most family members were rational, I would say, and they would know that 15 minutes of being tied to a rope is going to lead to death, right? So, and we also see them voluntarily getting the stuff and getting ready for the ceremony in the end, the sacrificial ritual. So, I think that it's more like it has to be destructive obedience, one, and two, the fact that they were involved in it for so long that they just had to go ahead with it and they didn't really have an option.
I think part of it is also, which I took note of, is that the way the technicalities involved in the hanging. So, for example, they were tied up, all their hands were tied up with ropes, very tightly, all of them, and they were blindfolded. Secondly, and they were gagged, so they couldn't speak. So the fact that you're blindfolded, you cannot see other people around you, their reaction, so you wouldn't be able to know this has gone really bad. Even if you got a sense of it, you cannot speak it out. Your mouth is closed, so you cannot scream, so other people are not going to get influenced. And see, if you want to get out, your hands are tied, so you cannot get out. So like, even though in the diary, what is so creepy is that he says in the voice of his grandfather, ki you should do all of these things. You should tie your hands, you should put cotton in your ear. Again, you can't hear other people then, right? If you put cotton in your ears, you should blindfold yourself, you should gag your mouth. All of this is in part makes it difficult for them to get out of this situation and know what they're really in it once they're in it, right?
Wow, that's actually a very interesting finding. Like I never noticed this. And now that you have said this, and I haven't watched the third episode, so I'm not entirely sure. But to have such a thorough plan it wouldn't be impulsive, right? It could have been planned, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, there are people who speculate, of course, it's premeditated. I mean, they have speculated like Lalit wanted to have an upper hand, but I don't know how much we can really talk about it concretely, because that's the mystery of this case. We only thing that we know, or only things that we know, is through the diaries. That's it. And the diaries are, even though they are insightful, they have so much mystery around them. We don't really know much. The fact that they didn't speak to anyone, in all these 11 years, as Somil was saying about domestic abuse, is such a good point, because in domestic abuse, if there are so many incentives to be in it, or incentive is not the right word, but if there's so many reasons why they're bound up, and why they can't leave. If there is one reason that they can leave, is if they speak out, if they speak to other people who give them other points of view which they wouldn't have inside the marriage, right? This is exactly something which was lacking in this case. If they would have been able to speak to someone else, they would have gotten another point of view, which of course would have put an end to this. But none of them spoke out. So we don't know so much. And the fact that we don't know so much shows that they were able to go to such an extreme, because they were in their own circle.
Yeah, that makes sense. And like that's where the abuser comes into picture now. Like especially when we're talking about domestic abuse, we usually have this parallel. He's either a pit bull or a cobra. So I'm not going to get too much into the pitbull aspect, but the cobra. Why do we call them cobras? Because cobras, traditionally snakes, we like they are associated with sly thinking and all of that. So the abuser in all of these cases makes sure that the victim does not speak out. How in this case Lalit must have ensured that the victims are not like the other members of the family are not speaking out. Like there was one diary entry where he says गलतियाँ करते हो और फिर आके बताते हो कि गलतियाँ नहीं की. So that could be something like where the family members have gone out and spoken about it or not followed an instruction. So
Yeah, they definitely didn't speak about it, but definitely what you're saying is right. That these things they put everyone in line, so to speak.
they so the abuser or the head here, Lalit, I mean, I don't know if we can call him an abuser
Yeah,
or
I
whatever.
think that's an important note. Like even though the comparisons between domestic abuse and this, there are a lot of good points which come out. I think there is a good question about can we say he's an abuser? Because in one thing which comes out is Lalit is as much a victim in a lot of ways because given his psychological conditions he was going through, which went untreated. There are things in episode 3 which really bring that out, that how much of Lalit's history, and his psychological conditions which went untreated was an impetus for this to happen. And the fact is that even though people have speculated that it's premeditated, maybe, he wanted it, the fact is even he went ahead with it and his life also went ahead with it. So that at least gives a good reason to question, this. What comes up is all of them were a victim of something which should have been addressed, in a sociological sense, in a psychological sense, which wasn't.
Yeah, and in fact, like we have this concept called mens rea, which means motive to murder. In court, to prove that someone is a murderer, you need this mens rea, which means the person who's being convicted has had and clear intention to murder the victim. If that's not there, then it's not considered as murder. So here, did Lalit have the mens rea? Did he know that he is actively killing these people? And if so, then why did he go ahead and kill himself too? Like,
Yeah.
these are just some unanswered questions.
I think that this ambiguity, and there's so many ambiguities in this case, is something which makes people keep coming back to this. Because, on one level, the way the deaths happened, there was like the technical things which we spoke about, from the way they were tied and everything, all of them would make people think it's premeditated. But on the other hand, there's so much, the fact that Lalit died, the fact that there's so much trauma in the family, which were unanswered. It all of these two sides kind of muddies us into taking a clear stand about, this they are the victims and this is the perpetrator. It's almost, to me, the real tragedy is the entirety of family, just going away overnight, being taken from this world, and something which definitely could have been averted, and as Somil earlier pointed out in the podcast, that it is something, what they were dealing with is an extremity or something, or values which are very much present in society. The fact that you are supposed to keep the family secrets, or things, there's certain things which you are not supposed to talk about outside family, and that's one thing. The other thing is that you're always supposed to listen to the person with authority, which is elders in this case, right? You're always supposed to follow the command, because they are doing it for good. In this case, those two things taken to extreme is what caused them to die. So I think what this case does is really makes us question, some of the fundamental things which are not out there. It's very easy for us to sit here and be like, in some sense sensationalize this case and be like, this is out there, this doesn't happen to us, we can separate ourselves from this case. But I think what's more important is to look at these fundamental things, these values which is so much entrenched in our society, and question them. How much do they contribute or could contribute to things going wrong?
So, this was the first episode of the podcast. Apologies for the slight bumps and hiccups in the flow of this conversation. We are still figuring out the process of podcasting and aim to make the listening experience only smoother as we go along.
We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we would love to hear your thoughts under the YouTube comments or via mail at allthingsculturepod@gmail.com. We have a few more podcast ideas that we would love to materialize in the future, and any kind of support, be it in terms of likes, positive reviews, or subscriptions, would go a long way for this podcast.
For now, until next time, signing off the pod.